to Chairman and Ranking Member last Friday on the upcoming FISA report that is now with the Attorney General. But let me go first to what Mr. Stubbe just talked about. Have you been asked to testify by Chairman Cummings or Chairman Nadler about the Comey IG report you released 3 weeks ago?
No, I'm not.
Have you been approached at all by the chairman of those respective committees?
Personally, I have not. I can check with anybody else in my organization, but I'm not aware of any.
They've been asked you about it?
Oh, I'm sure they've asked about it.
But
I'm sorry,
ask about
hearing.
you testifying and answering questions about that specific report.
About a hearing, I don't believe
hearing.
there have been discussions.
Have you had any discussions with Chairman Cummings or Chairman Nadler about the upcoming FISA report, particularly subsequent to this letter, or even before this letter, about the FISA report when you might testify in front of either committee?
We haven't had, to my knowledge, discussions about testimony or a hearing. We've had discussions generally about the report and timing, but not about.
I think in your letter you point out you talked to over 100 interviews, over 1 million records your team examined. You spent a lot of time on this report. This is pretty significant. You would anticipate testifying in front of both the House Oversight Committee, which has jurisdiction over the Inspector Generals, and the House Judiciary Committee. Is that right?
I guess I would say as to any of my reports, I always am available and willing to testify. I'm not sure I'd want to advocate for being in 4 hearings, 2 here and 2 on the Senate side. So,
well, we combined them last year, a year and a half ago.
Yes.
On one. We did that. So all I know is I think, as Mr. Stubbe said, this is important information, and frankly, the American people would like to see it. Let me go, if I could, to the recent IG report about Mr. Comey's leaked memos, and I want to read from it. I'm talking about on page 17 of your report, January 7th, 2017, memo number 1, and you say Comey's first one-on-one meeting with President Trump occurred on January 6, 2017. Is that right?
That's right.
And before briefing I'm reading from your report. Before briefing President-elect Trump, Mr. Comey met with senior leaders at the FBI, Jim Rubicki, Andy McCabe, Jim Baker, and supervisors of the FBI's investigation. Is that right?
Again, I don't have it in front of me, but that's my
Yeah, so he has a pre-meeting. They're going to go up to brief President-elect Trump,
right.
January 6, 2017, so it's President-elect Trump at the time. They have a pre-meeting to figure out how this is going to go. And actually, even more of a pre-meeting they have with Mr. Clapper and Mr. Brennan to figure out how exactly the briefing for the President-elect is going to happen. Is that right?
And who's going to do it.
And who's going to do what. Right. And they break it into 2 parts. All of them brief the President-elect on general assessment, intelligence assessment, the ICA. And then they all leave, and Mr. Comey sits down with the President. Is that right?
That's my recollection, yes.
So Mr. Comey sits down with President-elect Trump and talks to him about what?
Again, I don't have the report in front of me, but my recollection is what we were told is it's about what has come to be known as the salacious and unverified reporting about certain events in Moscow.
Witnesses interviewed by the OIG also said they discussed Trump's potential responses to being told about the salacious information in the dossier, including that President Trump might make statements about or provide information of value to a pending Russia interference investigation. Is that right?
That's my recollection.
Yeah, so Comey stuck around and briefed him on the dossier.
Well, on that one piece is my recollection.
Understand. So what I'm interested in is we always thought that this meeting was to give the President the intelligence assessment and fill him and give him a briefing. He's President-elect. But it now looks like, based on what you wrote at the bottom of page 17, that they included trying to get information on the pending Russia interference. So it wasn't just information going one way. They were actually trying to get information from the President as well. Is that right?
That's what we've reported.
That's different. That's different. That's something I don't think we knew before. Multiple FBI witnesses recalled agreeing ahead of time that Comey should memorialize this event after it happens, right?
Right.
So he gets in the car on the way home, and he immediately starts memorializing what took place. It's interesting. One of the things that he said, the reason they did this was because they thought the President-elect might misrepresent what happened in the encounter. Remember that from the report?
Vaguely.
Yeah.
Again, I'd have to.
It says it on page 18. I think that's amazing to me, because the irony was the only one misrepresenting anything, it seems to me, was Mr. Comey, because all the while he's trying to get information from the president about the pending investigation, he's been telling the president he's not even under investigation.
I thank the gentleman. If, Mr. Horowitz, you want to respond?
I have nothing further to say. I would stand by our report.
Could I ask one question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Horowitz, was President Trump under investigation at the time that this all happened on January 6th?
I don't know that I'm in a position to say one way or another. I've read what the memos say, and what Mr. Comey in the memos reported he represented to the president, that the president was not, or the president-elect at the time.
He'd in fact been told by the very guy who had to memorialize this conversation, was trying to get information from the president, that he wasn't in fact under investigation by that very individual.
And all I can speak to is what is in the memos.
What
was said. I don't know independently what was going on in the investigation.
Thank you.
At that time.
I thank the gentleman. The distinguished ranking member is recognized for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Horowitz, I'm going to follow up a little bit on where Mr. Jordan just said, but before I do that, I want to say this. The chairman and I were talking about, we appreciate your professionalism. The fact that he can't influence you and the fact that I can't influence you may frustrate both of us, but we both appreciate the fact that we can't actually affect your independence. And here's, if your IG community at DOJ shared information with the media the way that you found in your inspections, would that undermine your overall objective in terms of sharing information with the media?
If anyone on my staff
Yes.
did that, there would be serious consequences, because it would have a significant effect on our work.
And so wouldn't you draw the same conclusion that sharing information under ongoing investigations within the DOJ and FBI is not a practice that we should actually embrace?
Absolutely.
Did you find that in some of your Inspector General's report on what has already been published with relationship to Director James Comey?
We did.
Multiple times?
Well, we have in that report the one instance where it occurred through Mr. Richmond to the press.
All right. Do you, once you have a report that is out, and once we've read the report, do you go back and look at congressional testimony to correlate between what you were told under oath by witnesses versus testimony that has been given to Congress to make sure that those two come together?
If we're aware of it and it relates directly to it, yes, but obviously we're not up to date on all the different testimonies that occurred. So usually we rely on the referrals.
Right, and so that's where I'm kind of going to this, because we've taken now your report and we've put it side by side, congressional testimony that James Comey made before the Joint Oversight and Judiciary hearing, and I'm finding just a number of irregularities. So would it be appropriate if Ranking Member Jordan and I were to refer those inconsistencies to the IG, and if we did that, would the IG look at those inconsistencies?
It's certainly appropriate for us to get a referral about a then employee of the department, which is, I think, the hearing you're probably referencing, and then we would assess it, and as you indicated before, we would make an independent assessment of whether it's appropriate for us to.
Well, I'll give you one example. Mr. Gowdy was asking, it said, did you initiate an obstruction of justice investigation based on what the president said? It was a very clear question. Mr. Comey said, I don't think so. I don't recall doing that, so I don't think so. However, on page 13 of your IG's report, it said that Comey purposely leaked the memos so that they could have a special counsel appointed to investigate obstruction of justice. So two of those cannot be true. They're at opposite dynamics in terms of what they're constructing, and we have dozens of examples where that has happened. Is that something that would be important for the American people to know and for you to look into?
I guess I would say, as in any situation, we'd want to get the referral, the testimony, and so we could make.
So we'll be referring those inconsistencies to you today, Mr. Horowitz, and I think that it's important that the American people get to look at this. My understanding is from reports that, and from your letter, that you have officially given the FISA abuse work that you've done over to be reviewed by the appropriate parties at DOJ. Is that correct?
So we've given our factual findings to the department for their marking. What we then do once we get it back, whether we have to go back and forth on the markings is one issue.
Right.
Once those are final, we then take that and try and write our public report from that.
Right.
Because we want to make as much of this public. Sometimes we'll have to either redact information or write around it, but that would be the next stage after this. So we're not quite final yet.
Right. So at this point, can you rule out the fact that there will be any criminal referrals as it relates to this new FISA abuse report that is coming out? Can you rule that out?
I'm not going to speak to that issue one way or the other.
All right. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, for Mr. Horowitz. I want to direct your attention to conclusions involving Comey failing to safeguard the FBI's Flynn investigation, which is going on at the time. You wrote Comey's closest senior FBI advisors were shocked when they learned the former FBI director instructed the release of his memo containing information about the ongoing FBI investigation, right?
That's correct.
What specifically did they say to your office?
I don't have the report in front of me, but I remember them saying words like shock, surprise, those kinds of words when they learned that he had released the information through Mr. Richmond to a reporter.
And they were unsolicited reactions?
Yes, they were during testimony under oath that were recorded.
Why do you think they were shocked or stunned?
Well, it was completely inconsistent, as we wrote in the report, with department policy and how we expect, and I think they expect, FBI employees to handle law enforcement information.
Okay, one advisor used the term disappointed to describe Comey's misconduct. Can you explain why they'd be disappointed in the FBI director?
Well, I'm not going to speak to what was in their mind when they said the words, but I can say again, I think there's a general understanding in the department and within the FBI that when you have law enforcement information, you don't disclose it to the press when there's an ongoing criminal investigation, which there was at the time.
Okay. Comey discussed or showed contents of the memos with people outside the FBI, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Then Acting DA Administrator Chuck Rosenberg saw a Comey memo, right?
I don't have the report in front of me. I think that's correct. I think they either talked about it or he showed it to him.
Okay. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I right now have a vote in another committee, so I'm going to yield the rest of my time to Congressman Jordan.
I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Horowitz, I want to go back to page 17, where we were a few minutes ago. Before briefing President-elect Trump, Comey met with senior leaders of the FBI, including Chief of Staff Jim Rubicki, then FBI Deputy Director Andy McCabe, then FBI General Counsel Jim Baker, and the supervisors of the FBI's investigation of the Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. So he meets with his key players, key team, people heading the investigation, and the top people at the FBI. Goes up to Trump Tower, has the meeting, his one-on-one meeting with the president where he briefs him on the dossier. That meeting is done. He immediately comes back out and starts recording what took place, memorializing the conversation with the president-elect, right?
That's correct.
Multiple FBI witnesses recalled agreeing ahead of time that Comey should memorialize this meeting. So the same people that he met with in the pre-meeting said, hey, when you go talk with the president-elect, as soon as you come out, we're going to have a secure laptop, you write it all down.
Right.
And you need to write it all down because we think the president-elect might misrepresent something later on, right?
If I recall correctly, that was one of the reasons.
One of the reasons, all right? Even though the very guy who's in there giving the briefing is misrepresenting a fundamental fact to the President of the United States, telling him he's not under investigation when they're actually trying to set the President up, in my opinion, get information from the President. So he goes back out, he memorializes this, and then you say in the next paragraph down, he memorialized Memo 1, and he had it that way until he arrived at FBI's New York field office, where Comey gave a quick download of his conversation with the very same people who he had the pre-meeting with, Mr. Rubicki, Mr. McCabe, Mr. Baker, and supervisors of the FBI Crossfire Hurricane investigation. Is that all accurate?
That's my recollection.
Okay, so you used three names twice, Rubicki, McCabe, and Baker, and then instead of saying other names, you say supervisors. Are those supervisors the people who I suspect they are, the people who ran the Crossfire Hurricane? Are those supervisors Peter Strzok and Lisa Page?
I don't recall as I sit here. I'd have to go back and look at it, and if we can, with all of these issues, we have to look at the Privacy Act and other laws to see what we can do, but I'll go back and check. I'm not sure that is the case, so let me go back and check.
Could it be a bigger number than those two? If it's not those two, it could be other two.
Or it could be others.
It could be others as well, or it could be
yes.
those two plus others.
I don't know as I sit here who were those individuals.
Is it likely that Peter Strzok is one in knowing that he was the guy who led the Crossfire Hurricane investigation?
I actually have no idea if that's likely or not, because I'm not sure that's entirely accurate, that your reference to what his role was at various times.
Okay.
I thank the gentleman. Thank you.
Thank
for your
you,
response.
Ms.
Thank you,
Horowitz.
Mr. Jordan. Chair now recognizes himself for his 5 minutes.